The morning sun was just beginning to peek through the curtains of a small apartment on the south side of the city. Inside, a 12-year-old boy sat cross-legged on his bed, carefully counting the money he'd been saving for weeks. 20, 30, 40, $43.75, he whispered to himself, his eyes shining with hope. Each dollar represented the small chores he'd done, taking out neighbors' trash, helping at the corner store, and saving every quarter of his lunch money he could spare. He looked down at his worn-out basketball shoes, the ones he'd been wearing for almost 2 years now. The sole was peeling off on one side, and there was a hole near the toe that let water seep in whenever it rained. His mom had tried to fix them with super glue 3 times already, but they both knew it was just a temporary solution. "Baby, you ready for school?" His mom's tired but warm voice called from the kitchen. She was already in her nurse's aide uniform, ready for another long day of helping others. She worked 2 jobs, spending her days at the local nursing home and her evenings cleaning offices. The boy knew how hard she worked to keep food on the table and a roof over their heads. "Come in, Mom," he called back, carefully tucking the money into his jacket pocket. He'd been eyeing a pair of basketball shoes at the discount store for months. They weren't the fancy brand that some kids at school wore, but they were solid and sturdy, and most importantly, they were within his budget. He planned to stop by the store after school today. In the kitchen, his mom had already packed his lunch: a peanut butter sandwich, an apple, and a small bag of crackers. She was heating up some oatmeal for breakfast, the same breakfast they had most mornings. As he sat down to eat, she kissed the top of his head, her eyes crinkling with love. "Remember to wear your jacket, baby. They said it might rain later," she reminded him, grabbing her keys. "And don't forget to lock up properly when you leave." "I will, Mom," he promised, spooning up the oatmeal. He watched as she checked her pockets for her bus pass and work ID. "I might be a little late tonight. Mrs. Wilson asked if I could cover an extra hour at the nursing home," she explained, adjusting her name tag. "There's leftover spaghetti in the fridge for dinner. Just heat it up, okay?" The boy nodded, understanding as always. He knew his mom hated leaving him alone, but they both understood that's just how things had to be sometimes. His dad had left when he was too young to remember, and since then, it had just been the 2 of them against the world. After finishing his breakfast, he washed his bowl and spoon, just like his mom had taught him. He could hear the neighbors starting their day too, Mr. Lee next door calling out to his wife, the sounds of children laughing from the apartment above, and the familiar rumble of buses on the street below. Before leaving, he checked himself in the mirror near the door. His school uniform was neat and clean. His mom had ironed it the night before, even though she was exhausted from work. His hair was neatly combed, and despite his worn shoes, he looked presentable. His grandmother always said, "It's not about what you wear, but how you carry yourself." Thinking about his grandmother made him smile. She had passed away 2 years ago, but her words still guided him every day. She was the one who taught him about saving money, helping others, and most importantly, keeping his head high no matter what life threw at him. As he stepped out of the apartment, double-checking the lock like he promised, he patted his pocket where the money sat safely. The thought of finally having new shoes made him feel lighter, despite the heavy gray clouds gathering overhead. Little did he know that this ordinary morning was about to become extraordinary, and his life was about to change in ways he never expected. The morning air was crisp as the boy walked his usual route to school, carefully stepping around puddles from last night's rain. The clouds hung low, threatening more showers, but he didn't mind. His thoughts were filled with images of the new shoes he'd soon be wearing. No more stuffing paper in the holes, no more wet socks on rainy days. As he turned the corner onto Oak Street, something caught his attention. An elderly man in a wheelchair was struggling at the bottom of a steep sidewalk ramp. The wheelchair's wheels kept sliding backward on the wet concrete, and the man's frustrated sighs carried across the quiet morning air. The boy slowed his pace, watching as the man tried again. The veteran's cap on his head was faded and weathered, probably from years of wear. A small American flag pin gleamed on the cap's side, catching what little sunlight filtered through the clouds. The man's right pants leg was neatly pinned up, and one prosthetic leg rested against the side of the wheelchair. Next to the wheelchair sat a cardboard sign, its edges softened by humidity. In careful handwriting, it read, "Veteran needs help with bus fare to VA hospital. God bless." A small cup held a few scattered coins, not nearly enough for a bus ticket. The boy's hand instinctively went to his pocket, feeling the shape of his safe money through the fabric. He thought about his grandmother's stories about his grandfather, who had also been a veteran. Though he'd never met him, she always said he was the kindest man she'd known, always helping others even when he had little himself. Walking closer, you could see the strain on the veteran's face. The man's hands were weathered and strong, but they trembled slightly as he gripped the wheelchair's wheels. Despite the cool morning, beads of sweat dotted his forehead from the effort of trying to climb the ramp. "Excuse me, sir," the boy said softly, approaching the wheelchair. "Would you like some help?" The veteran looked up, surprise and gratitude mixing in his tired eyes. "That's mighty kind of you, son," he said, his voice warm despite his obvious exhaustion. "But I don't want to make you late for school." The boy glanced at his watch. He was actually running early today. "I have time, sir. My school's just up the street." Together, they tackled the ramp, the boy carefully pushing while the veteran guided the wheels. At the top, the man wiped his brow with a handkerchief that had seen better days. "Thank you, young man. These ramps get steeper every year, I swear." The veteran started to reach for his cup of coins, and the boy could see his hands shaking. "Got to count this again," the man muttered. "Need to make sure I have enough for the bus. Got an important appointment at the VA today." As the veteran carefully counted his coins, the boy could see the worry lines deepen on his face. The few dollars in change wouldn't be enough for the bus fare, let alone a meal. The man's jacket was thin for the cool weather, and the boy noticed he kept rubbing his hands together for warmth. The $43.75 felt like it was burning a hole in the boy's pocket. He thought about his shoes, about how long he'd saved, about how his feet hurt after basketball practice. But then he remembered something his mom always said while getting ready for her night shift. Sometimes being blessed means being able to be a blessing to others. The veteran was still counting his coins for the third time, as if hoping they would multiply. His shoulders had begun to slump, and the boy could see the moment the man realized he wouldn't have enough for the bus fare. Standing there on that damp morning, watching this proud veteran trying to maintain his dignity while clearly needing help, the boy made a decision that would change not just this morning, but the lives of many people in ways he couldn't yet imagine. The boy stood there for a moment, his heart pounding as he watched the veteran's trembling hands drop a few coins back into the cup. The morning traffic rushed by, creating a backdrop of city noise, but in that moment, all he could hear was his grandmother's voice in his head. "When you have a chance to help someone, that's God giving you an opportunity to be an angel on earth." His fingers touched the money in his pocket again. He'd worked so hard for it. 3 months of saving every quarter, dollar, and dime. He thought about the shoes waiting for him at the discount store, how he'd visited them twice a week just to make sure they were still there. Size 7, dark blue with white stripes, sturdy enough to last at least a year. He'd even memorized their spot on the shelf. The veteran was now looking at his watch, worry etched deeper into the lines of his face. "Maybe if I wait another hour," he mumbled to himself, "someone else might spare some change." His voice carried the weight of someone who had said similar words many times before. The boy looked down at his own worn-out shoes. The hole in the right one seemed to stare back at him, like an eye asking what he was going to do. He wiggled his toes and felt the dampness of the morning dew that had seeped through while he was walking. "Sir?" he said, his voice coming out softer than he intended. The veteran looked up, his eyes tired but kind. The boy's hand was already pulling out the carefully folded bills and collection of coins from his pocket. I have some money you can have." The veteran's eyes widened as the boy held out the entire amount, all $43.75. "Oh no, son, I couldn't possibly," he started to say, but the boy cut him off gently. "Please take it," he said, his voice growing stronger with certainty. "My grandma always said that helping others is the rent we pay for living on this earth." He smiled, remembering how she would say this while cooking extra food for sick neighbors or knitting scarves for homeless people in winter. The veteran's eyes grew misty as he looked at the money being offered. "That's very generous, but this looks like you've been saving it for something special." The boy shrugged, trying to appear more casual than he felt. "It's okay. You need it more than I do right now." He didn't mention the shoes, or how long he'd saved, or how the other kids sometimes made fun of his worn-out footwear during gym class. With slightly shaking hands, the veteran accepted the money. Son, he paused, seeming to struggle with words. This is more than just bus fare. This means I can get to my appointment and maybe get something to eat too. I haven't had a proper meal in a few days. The boy felt a warmth spread through his chest, replacing the ache of giving up his shoe money. There's a good diner just down the street, he said, pointing. They make really nice breakfast sandwiches. My mom and I go there sometimes on special days. The veteran carefully folded the money and tucked it into his jacket pocket, his movements deliberate and respectful, as if handling something precious. What's your name, son? He asked, his voice thick with emotion. The boy told him, and the veteran reached out to shake his hand. The handshake was firm and warm, like his grandfather's had been, according to his grandmother's stories. You're a rare kind of person, the veteran said. Your parents must be very proud. My mom is, the boy replied, thinking of her working her double shifts, always tired but never too tired to help others. She teaches me that we should always help if we can. Looking at his watch again, the boy realized he needed to get moving to make it to school on time. I have to go now, sir. I hope you have a good appointment. As he turned to leave, the veteran called out, Wait. The boy looked back. Thank you, the veteran said simply, but those two words carried the weight of 1,000 more. Walking away, the boy felt lighter somehow, despite the heaviness in his shoes. He thought about how his mom always said that doing the right thing might not be easy, but it always feels right in your heart. And his heart, despite giving up his dream of new shoes, felt fuller than ever. Just across the street, behind the gleaming windows of a small coffee shop, the owner was going through her morning routine. She had owned this shop for 15 years, serving the neighborhood its daily dose of caffeine and comfort. Every morning, she watched the city wake up through these windows, but today she would witness something extraordinary. She had been arranging fresh pastries in the display case when movement outside caught her eye. The sight of the young boy helping the veteran up the ramp had made her pause, coffee pot still in hand. There was something special about the way the child approached the situation, no hesitation, just pure willingness to help. Would you like a refill? She asked one of her regular customers, her eyes still drawn to the scene unfolding outside. The elderly lady at the counter followed her gaze, and they both watched in silence. 20 years as a military nurse had taught the shop owner to recognize the signs of a veteran in need. The carefully maintained wheelchair, the precisely folded pant leg, the proud set of shoulders despite obvious struggle, she had seen it countless times in her previous career. But it was the boy's actions that truly captured her attention. Through the window, she could see every detail of their interaction. The way the boy reached into his pocket, how his hand seemed to hesitate for just a moment before pulling out what was clearly his savings. The shop owner's throat tightened as she watched him hand over every single dollar he had. "Did you see that?" whispered the elderly customer, dabbing at her eyes with a napkin. "That young man just gave everything he had." The shop owner nodded, unable to speak for a moment. She hadn't missed the boy's worn-out shoes, the carefully maintained but clearly old-school uniform. This wasn't a child who could easily spare whatever amount he had just given away. As she watched the boy walk away towards school, she noticed something else. His step was lighter, despite his shabby shoes. There was a quiet dignity in his bearing that reminded her of the young soldiers she used to treat, the ones who would give their last cookie to a child in a war zone or share their water with a fellow injured soldier despite their own thirst. The veteran was now carefully maneuvering his wheelchair toward the diner the boy had pointed out. Through the window, she could see him stop for a moment, look at the money in his hand, then up at the sky as if saying a prayer of thanks. "You know," said another customer who had been watching, "that boy probably had no idea anyone was seeing what he did. That's what makes it so special." The shop owner wiped down the counter thoughtfully, her mind already working. In her years as a nurse, she had learned that small acts of kindness often had a way of creating bigger ripples of change. She had seen how one person's compassion could transform not just a moment, but entire lives. She walked to her small office in the back of the shop, where a wall of community flyers and business cards hung. Her fingers traced over the card of an old friend who now worked at the local middle school. The same school, she realized, where she had just watched that kind-hearted boy heading. Taking out her phone, she snapped a quick photo of the veteran who was now sitting in the diner across the street. Her years of experience told her this man needed more than just one day's help with bus fare. Then she looked in the direction the boy had walked, his small figure now just a dot in the distance. Sometimes, she said to herself, pulling out her phone, we're placed exactly where we need to be to witness something important. She had no idea yet how she would help, but 15 years of running a business in this community had taught her that when people came together, amazing things could happen. As she dialed her friend's number at the school, she looked again at the diner where the veteran sat, and then at the path the boy had taken. In all her years of serving coffee and watching life unfold through these windows, she had never seen such a pure act of kindness. And she knew, deep in her heart, that this story was far from over. The coffee shop owner spent her morning making calls between serving customers, her heart still moved by what she had witnessed. Her first call was to her old friend at the middle school, who listened intently to the story about the boy's act of kindness. "I think I know exactly who you're talking about," her friend said warmly. "He's in the 6th grade. Always polite, always helping others. Just last week, he stayed after school to help our janitor clean up a big spill in the cafeteria when everyone else had rushed out." As she learned more about the boy, the coffee shop owner's admiration grew. The school counselor shared stories of a child who, despite his own challenges, always found ways to help others. He tutored younger students during lunch breaks, shared his sandwich with kids who forgot their lunch money, and never complained about his own circumstances. His mother works incredibly hard, the counselor explained. She's at the nursing home during the day and cleans offices at night. Sometimes she comes straight from her night job to school events, still in her work uniform, just to support her son. The coffee shop owner took careful notes, her former military nurse's habit of documenting everything coming in handy. She learned that the boy helped care for his younger sister, who was in 2nd grade at the same school. Every morning, he would walk her to her classroom before heading to his own, making sure she had everything she needed for the day. "You know what really gets me?" the counselor continued. "Last month, during the school supply drive, he brought in extra pencils and notebooks. When I asked him about it, knowing his family's situation, he said his mom had taught him that there's always someone who needs help more than you do." During her lunch break, the coffee shop owner walked to the nursing home where the boy's mother worked. She didn't go in, but she watched the care and gentleness with which the staff treated the elderly residents. One of the older nurses recognized her from the coffee shop and stopped to chat. "Oh, you're asking about her? She's one of our best aides," the nurse said proudly. "The residents love her. She knows all their stories, their grandchildren's names, their favorite foods. Sometimes she stays extra hours just to sit with patients who don't have family visiting them." The pieces were coming together. A single mother working 2 jobs, never complaining, teaching her children the value of kindness and hard work by example. A boy who, despite wearing worn-out shoes and bringing simple lunches to school, still found ways to help others. Back at her coffee shop, the owner noticed the veteran had finished his meal at the diner and was now waiting at the bus stop. She watched as he helped an elderly lady with her shopping bags, even though managing his wheelchair made the task challenging. The kindness was rippling outward, touching life after life. That afternoon, she made one more call to her sister who ran a small business association in the neighborhood. As she shared the morning's events and what she had learned about the family, her sister grew quiet on the other end of the line. "You know," her sister finally said, "we've been talking about starting a community support program. Something to help local families and veterans. Maybe this is the push we needed." The coffee shop owner smiled, remembering how many times during her nursing career she had seen small acts of kindness grow into something bigger. She looked at her notes, the story of a hard-working mother, a kind-hearted boy, a struggling veteran, and a community that perhaps needed a reminder of how powerful simple acts of compassion could be. Sometimes, she told her sister, all it takes is one person to show us what's possible. This boy didn't just help a veteran today. He showed us who we could all be if we just opened our hearts a little wider. As the afternoon sun cast long shadows through her coffee shop windows, she began to draft an email to the business association members. The subject line was simple: a story of kindness that could change our community. She knew that what she had witnessed that morning was just the beginning of something much bigger. The coffee shop owner's email sparked something remarkable in the community. Within hours of sending it, her inbox began filling with responses from local business owners, each one touched by the story of the boy's selfless act. "I couldn't sleep last night thinking about this," said the owner of the local hardware store during their emergency business association meeting the next morning. He was an older man who had run his shop for 30 years. "A kid gives up his savings to help a veteran, not knowing if anyone's watching. That's the kind of community I want to be part of." The meeting room in the back of the coffee shop was packed. People were standing against the walls, many holding their morning coffee cups, all eager to help. The owner of the discount shoe store where the boy had been saving to buy his shoes was there too, quietly wiping his eyes as he heard the full story. "Those shoes he wanted," the shoe store owner said, his voice rough with emotion. "He would come in twice a week just to look at them. Never touched them, just stood there looking. I always wondered why he never bought them. Now I know he was saving up and he gave it all away." A local banker raised her hand. "What if we did more than just help one family? What if we created something lasting?" She pulled out her laptop and showed them statistics about local families struggling to make ends meet, about veterans needing support with medical appointments and transportation. The room buzzed with ideas. The owner of the diner where the veteran had eaten his breakfast spoke up next. "I serve at least 3 veterans a week who can barely afford a cup of coffee. What if we started a meal program? And what about a transportation fund?" added the owner of the local taxi service, "for veterans who need rides to medical appointments." The school principal, who had been invited to the meeting, shared more about the boy's family situation. "There are many students like him in our school," she explained. "Children who help their parents, who share their lunch money, who wear worn-out shoes but never complain. They deserve to know their community sees them." As ideas flew around the room, someone suggested creating a kindness scholarship fund. Not just for college, the local librarian clarified, but for immediate needs too. School supplies, clothes, shoes, things kids need right now. The veteran's story had touched them deeply as well. The coffee shop owner shared what she had learned about his situation, a former surgeon who had served multiple tours, struggling with medical bills and transportation to his VA appointments. "I have an empty apartment above my shop," offered the hardware store owner. "Been meaning to rent it out. Maybe we could help him get back on his feet instead." A local doctor stood up. "I know some specialists at the VA. Let me make some calls, see if we can expedite his care." The meeting lasted for hours. People who had lived and worked next to each other for years were suddenly sharing resources, making plans, offering what they could. The owner of a local printing shop designed flyers for their new community support program. The bakery owner promised to provide treats for their next meeting. What had started as one boy's act of kindness was transforming into something bigger. The business association created a committee to oversee their new community support initiatives. They called it the Ripple Effect Program, inspired by how one small act of kindness had created waves of change throughout their community. The local bank agreed to manage the scholarship fund, with transparent reporting to ensure every dollar helped families in need. The transportation company set up a special dispatch line for veterans needing rides to medical appointments. Restaurant owners developed a rotating schedule for providing meals to veterans and struggling families. As the meeting ended and people began to leave, many lingered to continue sharing ideas and making plans. The coffee shop owner watched them go, noticing how people who usually just nodded to each other in passing were now hugging, exchanging phone numbers, making plans to help. "You know what's amazing?" the school principal said as she gathered her things. "That little boy has no idea that his act of kindness this morning has inspired all of this. He probably went to school today thinking he just helped one person, but he's actually helped reshape our entire community." The coffee shop owner smiled, looking at the wall of sticky notes filled with ideas and action plans. "Sometimes," she said, "the biggest changes start with the smallest acts of kindness. And sometimes it takes a child to remind us of who we can be when we come together." 2 weeks passed quickly in a flurry of community activity. The school gymnasium was buzzing with excitement that Friday morning as students filed in for what they thought was a regular assembly. The boy sat with his classmates, his worn shoes tucked under the bleachers, unaware that he was the reason everyone had gathered. His mother sat in the back of the gym, still in her nursing aide uniform from her night shift. The school principal had called her personally to invite her, simply saying they were recognizing students for their achievements. She hadn't wanted to miss it, even though her eyes were heavy with fatigue. The veteran was there too, sitting in his wheelchair near the front. But he looked different now. His clothes were newer, his wheelchair had been repaired, and there was a light in his eyes that hadn't been there 2 weeks ago. The hardware store owner had helped him move into the apartment above his shop, and the local doctor had expedited his VA benefits. The assembly started normally enough. The principal welcomed everyone and talked about the importance of character and community. Then she said something that made the boy sit up straighter. "Today, we're here to talk about how one small act of kindness can change many lives." The coffee shop owner stepped forward, and the boy recognized her from his walks to school. She began telling the story of what she had witnessed that morning 2 weeks ago. As she spoke, the boy sank lower in his seat, his face growing warm. He hadn't done it for recognition, he had just wanted to help. Sometimes, the coffee shop owner said, the most extraordinary acts come from ordinary moments. 2 weeks ago, a young man in this room gave up something he had saved for months to help a stranger in need. The veteran wheeled himself forward then, and the boy's eyes widened in recognition. But instead of sitting in a regular wheelchair, he was now standing, supported by new prosthetic legs. "Thanks to this young man's kindness," the veteran said, his voice strong with emotion, "I not only made it to my VA appointment that day, but I found a whole community willing to help." The boy watched in amazement as the veteran walked the last few steps to the microphone. "I spent 20 years in the military," he continued, "and I've seen courage in many forms. But sometimes the greatest courage is in small acts of kindness, like a boy giving up his savings to help a stranger." The principal stepped forward again, holding a shoebox. The boy's heart skipped a beat as he recognized the box from the discount store window. But when she opened it, inside lay not just the shoes he had been saving for, but an envelope as well. "Please come down," she said gently, and the boy walked to the front, acutely aware of his squeaking shoes. His classmates had fallen completely silent. As he reached the front, he saw his mother being led forward too. Her eyes were filled with tears, but she was smiling. The veteran handed him the shoebox himself, standing proudly on his new legs. "The shoes are just the beginning," the principal explained, opening the envelope. "Our community has created a scholarship fund in your honor. We're calling it the Ripple Effect Scholarship because your one act of kindness has inspired our entire community to do better, to be better." The boy stood there, holding the shoebox, barely comprehending as the principal explained about the community programs that had been created, the Veteran Support System, the Family Assistance Fund, the Transportation Program. His simple act of helping one person had sparked a movement that would help hundreds. His mother was openly crying now, but they were happy tears. The hardware store owner stepped forward to explain how they had helped the veteran find housing and medical care. The coffee shop owner shared how business owners across the community had come together to create lasting change. "But there's one more surprise," the veteran said, reaching into his jacket. He pulled out a small box and opened it, revealing a medal. "This is my Bronze Star from my service. I've kept it all these years as a reminder of what courage looks like. Today, I want you to have it because you showed me that courage doesn't just exist on battlefields. It exists in everyday choices to help others, even when it costs us something precious." As the veteran pinned the medal on the boy's shirt, the gymnasium erupted in applause. Students, teachers, and community members stood, cheering for their classmate who had taught them all a valuable lesson about kindness and courage. The boy looked down at his new shoes, then at the medal, then up at his mother's proud face. He thought about his grandmother's words about being an angel on earth, about his mother's lessons on helping others, about all the times he had wished he could do more to help people in need. "Sometimes," the veteran said softly, just to him, "the smallest acts of kindness have the biggest impact. You didn't just help me that morning, you reminded an entire community of who we can be when we look out for each other." And as the boy stood there, surrounded by his community, wearing his new shoes and his veteran's medal, he realized that his grandmother had been right all along. Sometimes being blessed means being able to be a blessing to others, and sometimes the biggest changes start with the smallest acts of kindness.